How's it going, everyone? Andrew Abaria here with another Yoga Masterminds analysis video. If you haven't been following this series, a couple months ago I decided to do this creative project where I would analyze all of the different postures found in the book Light on Yoga by BKS Iyengar. So I'm doing about a pose a week, and this week we find ourselves analyzing Warrior 3. So let me start off by saying that Warrior 3 is a very difficult pose. There's an obvious balance component, right? You're standing on one foot. But you also need hamstring flexibility in that standing leg. You need hamstring strength in the lifted leg. There's different ways to articulate the arms. So because this is a complex posture, I find that students, or rather teachers, when they're teaching their students, get a little bit nervous, they get a little bit flustered, and so what they end up doing is they end up just listing out all of the different cues. Right, and it's good that you, in your teacher training program, you learned that you need to hug the standing hip in, that you need to pull that standing femur bone back to the lifted leg. It's great that you know that there's a required internal spin of that lifted leg. All of that's great, but I think to take your teaching to the next level, you really need to practice the art of being present. And I know that's a phrase that is just overused in the yoga world, so let me make it more concrete so you can actually do something with that phrase. You need to be present with what you're seeing in your student's body. Because it's a complex posture, there's gonna be things that your student is doing well, and there's gonna be things that your student is either forgetting about or doesn't have enough energy for. And so instead of just standing there listing out all the cues, sort of like this mindless robot, you need to be present with what you're seeing, and then diagnosing the posture and offering a curated set of cues that is customized for your student. So as always, I have some visuals I want to show you, and let's see if you can see the main difference between the two photos that I have here and a sort of narrative, a story as to why the pictures look different, why student A would be articulating their body in the way they are versus the narrative for student B. What is going on with them? What are they focusing on? Where are they putting their energy, and why the pose looks like the way it does for them? So here's the first photo for this one student doing Warrior 3. And then I'm gonna show you another photo of another student doing Warrior 3. And we'll look at it one more time and see if you can see the differences between the two postures, but I think more importantly, coming up with a narrative as to why the student is articulating their body in this very specific way for photo A, and why this student is articulating their body in this particular way for this photo, for student B. All right, so let's diagnose student A first. And I think one of the obvious things to note here is this bending of the knee. And so you got to ask yourself, why is this student bending the knee? And this is where that narrative question comes into play. Now you could say, well, they're bending the knee because they're a beginner student. I would argue against that because of this. Because the articulation of the rest of the body is really great. If you actually just turn that picture 90 degrees, it looks like that person's standing in Tadasana. Which, if you've ever tried Warrior 3, trying to emulate Tadasana and all of the other limbs beyond that standing limb is very difficult. So the narrative here that I am constructing in my head, and this is what I would do basically in a split second, which will, as you'll see in a second, inform what I say to them, is that this student is giving up on the strong articulation, the strong efforts for the standing leg so that they can put their energy and efforts into a clean articulation of the rest of the body, right? Look at the arms, they're in line with the ears. Look at the straightness of that lifted leg. Look at the fairly good execution of the internal rotation of that lifted leg, okay? So now let's look at this other student. And I think the obvious thing to note here is that the student has straightened their standing leg. And so the narrative that I've come up with here is that because it's very difficult to get that straight leg articulation in the standing leg, that I also don't think that the student is a beginner student. Instead, I think the student is focusing so much on the front leg and doesn't have enough energy to articulate the rest of the body. If you look at the rest of the body here in comparison to the other student, it looks less and less like Tadasana. So, and this is a phenomenon that I'm working on with my own body, and it's very difficult for me to do this. So this lifted leg is not in a straight line. It's kind of curved upwards. Do you guys know why that happens? I think for me, why that happens for me is that I'm not injecting that thigh bone into the hip socket enough. When I inject that thigh bone in the hip socket, the leg kind of lowers and the leg kind of straightens out on its own. Also, this student needs to spin the inner thigh a little bit more up towards the sky to get that pinky toe and big toe equally facing the ground. So those are the two narratives that I've come up for the different students. And what I would say to them, let me just quickly erase these marks so you can see things more clearly. And see now without the marks if you can identify what I've been kind of describing here. That I would say to this student, great job with the lifted leg, great job with your arms. Let's focus now, for this first student, this is what I would say, let's focus now on hugging the right hip in, keeping the awareness you've built in the upper body and in the left leg, but now try to straighten the leg by pulling the right hip back towards the left heel without losing the work you've done in the rest of the body. That's sort of this customized cueing that I would give this student, and this is what I would say for this other student. I would say, great job with the getting the standing leg straight. Now, let's focus on the lifted leg. Internally spin that inner thigh of the right leg as you inject the thigh bone into the hip socket. And so, like I said earlier, instead of kind of just standing there and saying all the 6 or 7 different cues that you learned in your teacher training program, again, there's nothing wrong with that, but your students are already working really hard, and their mind and their body only has so much energy to focus on what you're saying to them, because these students look like advanced students. They're probably already doing work without you saying anything. And so then the narrative of how you're diagnosing what they're doing is super important so that it informs the cue set that you give them. And saying fewer things in this instance is going to be better because the students are already doing work. They already have a limited amount of energy, and the limited amount of energy that they do have left, you want to put it in the right places. You'll get a different effect if you kind of just stand there and say the 7 different things. It's not going to do your student justice as much as if you selectively pinpoint 1 or 2 things that they can work on to build even more optimal expressions in their postures. So I'm going to leave it there for now for this video. Hopefully all of that made sense. If it doesn't, feel free to leave a comment and let me know what questions you do still have. I really appreciate there's many of you watching each and every week. Well, I love that. I love the likes. If you do like this content, make sure you share it with other like-minded yogis. We really want to build the Yoga Masterminds community to include everyone that can really benefit from this kind of content. So yeah, like the video, share it with others, and if you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel so you can get these videos sent directly to your inbox each and every week. Thanks you guys for watching, and I will see you in the next Yoga Masterminds analysis video.